Hi, this is Sophie Gilbert with 4-H News, and I'm here with Jim Patton. Jim, tell us what you do.
Well, hi, Sophie. I'm the Executive Director of the Port of Coupville, and the job is to respond to the direction of the commissioners who are elected. There are 3 commissioners elected for each of Washington State's ports, and there are about 82 ports altogether.
We're in Coupville, sitting on the edge of Penn Cove. So tell us about this really old building back behind us, the history.
Well, it is really old as far as the history of the United States goes. It's a little over 100 years old. It was the original way that the local farmers brought their supplies to the island, and they got their grain and other crops off the island, because there was no bridge that Deception State passed, and there was no Washington State ferry system. And this was the only deep water harbor and deep water port on the whole of Whidbey Island. That's the original wharf structure out there. It was renovated and restored to some degree about 20 years ago, as this causeway that connects it to the land was also renovated and restored.
So tell us, what does a port do?
Well, you know, the term port typically implies a harbor, a place where ships can find safe refuge. It has a special meaning here in the state of Washington, though, because in 1911, with, I think, some great foresight, the state legislature decided to put into place Washington State port districts with a mission of creating economic development for the state of Washington. As I mentioned a minute ago, there are about 82 of them now. Some of them own harbors. The big ones, like Seattle and Tacoma, are container ports. Huge industrial economic development there these days. Many of the Washington State ports own airports. We don't. We own 2 things, both historic. One is the wharf that we talked about a few seconds ago, and the other is more recently acquired, the historic Green Bank Farm. It's a 350-acre farm right smack in the middle of the island, and it's one of the most picturesque icons of Whidbey Island. In 1911, when they came up with this idea, the idea was to take some money from property taxes and to enable and empower these new port districts to spend that money wisely in terms of creating economic development opportunity, living wage jobs, and that sort of thing. And let me just say that the dilemma for us here in this picturesque environment that we're filming right now is to balance that mission of economic development with the absolute necessity to maintain the wonderful environment that you see here. It would be very, very easy to damage this environment by pushing ahead with economic development without taking some reasonable precautions. And that's essentially what my job's all about.
What do you mean by protecting the environment? How do you do that?
Well, it's not as difficult as it might seem. We've tried to make common cause with organizations like Washington State University because they sponsor a very important program in this environment here, and that's called the Beach Watcher program. Not only are they committed to the mission of keeping our beaches free of debris, but they also want to protect the marine mammals that surround this island. And one of the things we've been able to do with them here in recent times has been to open up the breezeway inside the wharf that you see here to provide a place to display the skeletons of a couple of marine mammals that the beach watchers discovered already dead, unfortunately, here on the beaches of Whidbey Island. And they did the necessary preparation of the carcasses of these marine mammals so that for generations now we'll be able to see what their interior bone structure looks like, because they've been hanging now for about 1.5 years from the overhead here. Insofar as we've been able to work closely with the beach watchers and the rest of the WSU contingents, we have probably more opportunities in the future as well to lean into them and make common cause in terms of protecting the environment, and we can talk about that if you like.
Tell us about the visitorship in this town.
Well, visitorship is important to the economic development of Whidbey Island, and we do have thousands of visitors every year. We've got some splendid visual icons like Deception Pass Bridge and Green Bank Farm that I mentioned, and of course this historic wharf. A lot of visitors come here because they want to see the town in which a certain movie was made. this town has been the site of at least 3 movies that I'm aware of. And the funny thing about that is that when Hollywood comes up here to make a movie, they paint the fronts of all of our buildings along our little main street in order to coincide with the mood that they want for the movie, and then they promise our people that they'll paint them back again. So every few years we get the town repainted.
So what does the future hold for the wharf and the WSU partnership?
Well, Sophie, that's really a compound question. First, let me talk about the future of the wharf. If you look behind me, one of the things that you'd be able to see from a little different vantage point is the bottom. Penn Cove is pure enough to support an industrial development called the Penn Cove mussels. And we have mussel rafts right around the bend over there. And one of the things we want to make certain of, as far as the future of the wharf is concerned, is that we do nothing to pollute Penn Cove. I'm under a fair amount of pressure to build a modern marina out here, and I've resisted that pressure because if you're familiar with the water around modern marinas, you don't want to float in it, and you certainly can't see the bottom when you look down. Now, in that context, we started working with Don Meehan and the WSU folks some time ago in order to improve the quality of our displays out on that wharf. It's, of course, no longer a grain transshipment place. What it is now is a collection of small stores. There's a little restaurant out there. There's a curio shop. There's a small marine supply shop. But it has a large breezeway. And we mentioned a few minutes ago the skeletons of a couple of marine mammals, Rosie and Rudy, we call them, hanging from the overhead here. And they're enormously popular. We talked about visitorship. And that typically to people means tourism. But in point of fact, every school child in every school on Whidbey Island comes out here, and they're instructed by the WSU beach watchers as to the history of those marine mammals, how the skeletons got where they are, and what each bone means, and all of that sort of thing. We like that in the Port of Coupville because we're not only providing a picturesque place for visitors to come to and thereby helping the economic development, but we're telling something about this environment that we live in to all of those school children. And the WSU beach watchers help us to do that.
So are there any innovative exhibits coming in here?
Oh yes, we mentioned a few minutes ago that we're working closely with the Washington State University beach watchers. And just recently, through I think some brilliant social engineering, they obtained underwater cameras, a plankton station, other equipment like that, and we offered them an opportunity to install that modern equipment, a lot of it's high-tech, right out here at the wharf, so that when people come out to see the current exhibits that we just talked about, they'll be able to do some interactive work with computer screens, and of course all the children we're talking about are now high-tech qualified, and they'll be able to do this kind of thing. They'll be able to see with an underwater camera, for example, some of the underwater activity in this very pure water that I mentioned a few minutes ago. And I'm looking forward myself to that kind of exciting prospect. So we're doing everything we can now to facilitate that marine science center development here. And I think within a few months' time, we'll have all of that high-tech equipment in place. Then when the visitors or the children from the local schools come here, they'll be able to play with that equipment under some supervision. I'm counting on Dawn to provide, and to learn something. I think it'll be informative and educational for everybody that goes out to the wharf from now on.
So what difference will WSU make in the future plans of the Coupville port?
Well, it's going to make so much difference, I think, that if it didn't exist, we'd have to invent it. There's no other way for us to close the circle of creating economic development while at the same time protecting the environment and doing so in the way that I just described, mostly through education and through preserving the purity of this environment. We are in lockstep with the WSU beach watchers, and we're about to, in fact, provide an official document to that effect, which our commissioners will be much more comfortable with, and I'm sure that Dawn and the WSU beach watchers will be too. But beyond doing things in sort of an official way, there's a confraternity of people here on Whidbey Island that want to preserve this wonderful environment, protect it. And the port finds itself in league and in common cause with the WSU Beach Watchers, and I think we're very fortunate for that.
So did the volunteers help you get the levee?
Well, let me say something, Sophie, about the nature of the levee. I mentioned some time ago that in 1911 the state legislature decided that they would provide property tax money to the ports that they established to get them going and to provide them the wherewithal to do the economic development that the state wanted to see. That money is furnished in terms of something we call a levy, L-E-V-Y. And it's an annual subscription to the port, and it's paid from the property taxes of everybody who lives in the port district. That says that the people who live within the port district need to be satisfied about the way that the port is spending their money. One of the ways in which we spend the money that we get from the levy, from the people's property taxes, is in finding ways to illustrate the kind of work that we've talked about here with the WSU Beach Watchers. So that when we maintain something like the wharf there with its few small businesses, the Beach Watchers provide us, the volunteers provide us with the marine mammal artifacts and the other displays. The people of Whidbey Island and within the Port District can see that and feel that their money is not being wasted, that it's provided, in this case at least, in the case of the wharf, an opportunity for their children to learn. That's very important. And an opportunity to help protect the environment that they live in. That's also very important. And also an opportunity to stimulate economic development. All of those things justify in their minds letting some of their property values, property taxes, go to support the Port District.
This is Sophie Gilbert with 4-H News, sitting on the edge of Penn Cove in Coupville, Washington.